We are live streaming. No, still setting up. Done. Redirected.
Okay,
Great.
you're live.
Oh, and let's open up the presentation. But I'm gonna. Jane Marie, is it okay to start with you? If you do you have any words that you'd like to give?
Sure.
All right.
Well, thank you. For many years, I was also chair of traffic and transportation. And this has been a topic that has come up way too often all throughout the years. And especially as we've had, sadly, fatalities in our community. And so this is something that really affects our neighbors and our neighborhood. And I really appreciate you and everybody else who's volunteered for this to help be a part of it, to be a part of a solution for ourselves and our neighbors. So thank you. Thank you, Dan. We really appreciate you stepping up for this as chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Keep to formalities. Yeah, this first meeting of the Pedestrian Safety Subcommittee for 2025 is now called into order. My name is Dan Heddix. I'm the chair of this particular subcommittee, and this is our first one. So hopefully you guys can all see the deck here. And let's hit the ground running, so to speak, and go through an agenda. We'll go through some member introductions, a scope and timeline of what our committee is supposed to be doing. What are we actually going to accomplish? In that vein, we're going to look at the last in-depth report that CB10 produced back in 2011. We're going to go over some key metrics. Let's get all of our words together and know what we're talking about and share that same vocabulary. And then we're going to get to work. We're going to figure out what the table of contents is going to be for our report because we don't have much time. So I want to start out with introductions. We don't have everyone here today, but I would like to kind of just go around the room and introduce ourselves for both our benefit and the public. You can say, why you want to be on this board, a perspective you want to bring, or a personal story you might like to share about why this is important to you. And for me personally, I've witnessed pedestrian fatalities as a child in Bay Ridge. I had friends who passed away due to collisions, and I know multiple people who've had life-changing impacts due to collisions in Bay Ridge. And this is something I take very seriously and I really care about deeply. And that's why I wanted to be on this committee and it's why I wanted to chair it. But if anyone else wants to start. Yeah, Barbara, do you have anything? We'll go down the list.
Sure. So I joined this committee because I too have had experiences with pedestrian fatalities. I lived prior to moving here 5.5 years ago in Windsor Terrace, and I taught at MS 51. We had several students who were killed. One of them was a little boy named Sammy, and there was a lot of public outcry when he passed away, and a lot of community involvement in terms of, fighting for better traffic conditions in our neighborhood. Since I've moved here, I know of at least 5 fatalities, which are 5 too many. And I myself have almost been hit in a crosswalk. So I'm very careful when I go out and very anxious about going out at night. So those are the reasons why I'm on this committee.
Chris.
I can go next if you'd like. I joined the committee because I'm a parent. I'm also a youth and community advocate by nature and as employment, and I've had lost friends to some terrible accidents, vehicular accidents. And I think I've seen some, instances of very reckless driving in the neighborhood that I'm always concerned. about my daughter, walking home from school, um, and crossing certain intersections. So definitely a reason why and a commitment to make things better.
Thank you. You want to go?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know, you probably can't see me, but I'm Elizabeth Edmonds.
I got it.
Yeah.
There we go.
Hi, everyone. I'm Elizabeth Edmonds. I joined the committee. I have 3 children, and I don't particularly like to drive, and I like to walk around with them, and it's the main reason I moved to New York City, because I grew up in a more rural area, and it's been the past few years, particularly since the pandemic, it's been almost impossible to enjoy walking around Bay Ridge, which is because you're just scared all the time when you're crossing with the light. And so that's the main reason I joined the committee, but also we've had many, many near misses with cars, and calling to report them and seeing them again on the road a day later. Also now sometimes in the parks with motorbikes causing problems on the playgrounds themselves, which is just sort of it's not acceptable to subject our kids to that. So and then also 1 in 8 boys in the country right now is diagnosed with autism. And their risk perceptions are different from other kids in these cases. And we have a large number of kids with autism in Bay Ridge, and I think that we need to be mindful that these kids also need to be able to cross the street. So those are some of my concerns. And thank you.
All right. Mr. Ellison.
Hello, how are you?
All right.
I joined the committee years ago. In one of my early careers, I was a New York City paramedic, right? And I've actually witnessed several fatalities, right, with pedestrians being struck. Other reason is, recently, in the last few years, I put a dash cam in my car, and I've had pedestrians walk in front of my car, going, in the crosswalk in the don't walk area, almost being hit by bicycles. I've also had 2 bicycle accidents in the last 10 years. So I have concerns.
Does. All right. Is Dino on? I didn't see if
I think this was Dino pop on.
yeah,
Dino,
if you're there, go ahead.
So I actually joined the community board itself for this very reason, to address pedestrian and cyclist safety, which I think goes hand in hand, any non-motorist using our infrastructure on the roads. I've been the victim of a boring incident. I got pretty messed up, broke my nose and my tooth. My wife was hit by a driver doing an illegal U-turn by the food town on 3rd Avenue. Thankfully, we're both okay. We're still here. But Bay Ridge has fallen behind in a lot of ways when it comes to infrastructure improvements. So I hope we can address these issues. I'm also a driver. I own a car. So I walk, I drive, I ride my bike. I see all different perspectives, so I hope we can, address these issues and do what's right.
All right. Danny.
Hi, everybody. So I also similarly, I joined community board. As a lot of you know, I also run the Bay Ridge Environmental Group, and am very into environmental activism and issues. And obviously, the way we design our streets is an important aspect of that. And I've been fortunate that at least in the neighborhood, I haven't been the victim or known any victims very closely of traffic violence. But in the time that I've been as part of the Bay Ridge Environmental Group, I have gotten to know people who have lost their loved ones. Someone mentioned, the 5 fatalities that we've had in Bay Ridge in the past 5 years. I know friends or family of at least 2 of them now. And one is too many, 5 is an atrocity, and it's a choice for this to continue happening. So I really hope that we can begin to make some progress here.
All right. Is Ruth on? If so, go ahead and there you are.
Hi, everybody. Hi, Ruth. Good evening. Well, I joined the committee First of all, I echo everything that everyone has said. It's pretty scary out there for all of us. As chair of the Senior Issues Committee, I hope to bring a lot of this information back to that committee because there are a lot of concerns among the people on that committee because the community board gets a lot of feedback from older adults in the neighborhood. They are frightened walking on the streets. I'm talking about the sidewalks. There are vehicles, bicycles on the sidewalks, and that's an issue also. And we have to do something to help all of them, all of us feel safer. I mean, just driving in Bay Ridge, people are incredibly dangerous drivers. Like U-turns is like the biggest thing around. But I think that having these motorized bicycles and regular bikes on the sidewalks, it has to be eliminated. And I think we're going to need a lot of help from enforcement, police enforcement.
Is Stephanie on?
Yes, thank you, Dan.
Sure.
I have been a member of the Traffic and Transportation Committee since 2017, and I see where a lot of work still needs to be done. I joined Community Board and that committee. My mother had been hit by a car on 3rd Avenue and Bay Ridge Avenue. Fortunately, she had only minor injuries, but I also have children. And after my mother was hit by that car, she was very reluctant to go out. I think I make my children quite paranoid because I constantly am warning them about cars and how to manage walking on sidewalks and crossing the streets. And I hope that we can make some progress here. So thank you for having me.
Thank you. Jack wasn't able to make it today, but I'm sure we'll get to have a little bit of catch up on the next public meeting that we have. And Staley.
All right.
Yeah, we're gonna turn it again.
Hey, everybody. So I guess I come to this sort of from a public health perspective. Like Chris, I'm a paramedic. I've been a paramedic for 14 years. I've been an emergency department nurse for 3 years. And what you sort of come to realize doing those professions is that, while EMS and our trauma centers and stuff do the best that they can, that lives are really saved doing this kind of work. It's really about preventing the accidents in the first place that really makes a difference. So hopefully that perspective is useful to our group here.
Awesome. And
Doris is also.
oh yeah, and Doris, because we have an open slot with Jack. Yeah,
Hey.
so I want to jump in and
Thank you. I was not originally on the committee. I was on the 2001 committee. And I said, well, do I need to do this again? And then I thought about it and I said, yes. And I put together some of the thoughts I have, and I think there are lots of issues we have in Bay Ridge. We have a very difficult topography, pretty much south of 86th Street. We have many intersections that are dogleg intersections and are difficult for cars, cyclists, and pedestrians to cross. We have problems with speeding on 4th Avenue that we've asked the DOT to address, and they have not. I was at lunch with several Bay Ridge friends last week, and one of the main topics at lunch was bicycles on the sidewalk and bicycles going the wrong way, and bicycles and a thing on two wheels. And so I think there are a lot of important issues here that we need to address. And I think it'd be interesting. I mean, there's a lot of data available online, but I really think it's important to have eyes on the ground. I live near 4th Avenue and Shore Road. And I can tell you, there is egregious behavior by cars, cyclists, and pedestrians. So, and there needs to be information and a learning process for everyone is how we use our streets.
We're going to go into it today. We have no time to waste, right? So
Right.
those are our member introductions. We're going to jump on a thing. There we go. We already did the around the room. I forgot I had that slide. Let's do our committee scope. So really, and Doris, you mentioned the 2011 Pedestrian Safety Report. You were on that committee. That was compiled by George Fontes under then Chair Joanne Seminara. And we are essentially tasked on this committee with updating, replacing, doing something. We are going to generate a report, right? We're going to generate a document that is going to go in front of CB10's general committee, and we are going to vote on it. So a couple of things that I want this committee to be and things that it's not going to be. We are going to be data driven. We're going to try to get facts. Doris, you said we're going to be on the ground in addition to getting that digital data. We have to combine that. We are also all volunteer. This is for people who are members of the public. We don't do this for money. We are all here because we care about it. And we are entirely advisory. We are doing this for the community, but we can't really force anyone to do anything with our data. We can give it to the DOT, and in the end, it would be in their hands. Same thing for anything we want to send to any committee. That also means we're not beholden to them. We are not, we can lay blame if we feel like we need to, and we can hold to account agencies and groups that we feel have a role in pedestrian safety in this neighborhood. And we only have 146 days starting today to get that done. So we are going to be delivering this report on June 17th at the June board meeting. So starting now, we are going to start working on this report in 2025. We will get that vote and send it out. So an idea of our schedule. Now we can adjust this as we need as a committee, but let's start out with the idea. And it probably won't be one public meeting per month. It might be once every 2 or 3 months, but that might mean more working sessions. So public meetings are going to be open to the public, streamed on YouTube. That's what we're doing right now. There will be working sessions because a lot of this stuff is going to be maybe closed, public can't join them, but they are going to be intensely boring. We are going to go over data, we're going to assign homework, we're going to go back and forth about the thing, like, you know, just the editing and the creating of this report. But all of this will be recorded. So if people want to listen to us talk for 3 hours about something and go over, you know, mindless amounts of data, you absolutely can. And I love anyone who actually requests that in the future, if you're looking at this in the future. And this is what we're up against, 535 plus intersections in CB10. Wow. We're going to need to do a lot of legwork. This is the slide where I scare you all. We're starting in January and we're in the middle of a cold snap, right? If we're going to get on the ground, we're going to have to do it probably in some inclement weather for the next few months. But some of this can be digital, some of this can be research. We may need to do literally going out. I have bought speed guns for everyone. So if you want, come pick them up. We can do, yes, my wife, when it came, there's a big Amazon box. She's like, what is this? I'm like, you don't want to know. Pull them out and she's like, I can't believe you. But we're going to be able to, you know, count pedestrians, count cars. These are bits of data that will be very important. Statistical analysis, urban design research, editing, graphics, whatever we can do to make this accessible for people as well, not just a spreadsheet, but hopefully a narrative about why people are unsafe in this neighborhood and what can be done about it. And that's where our first crack at this in 2011 really happened. There were 6 other board members, 4 public members, but I did want to take a moment to really thank Maureen Landers and Breaks And the people who were activists back then who really pushed for that committee to happen and volunteered their time to make it happen. That 2011 report really was amazing for what was available at the time. Open Data NYC really wasn't up yet. You couldn't really do a lot with the digital data that really wasn't there. But this is what they really put together. They had an introduction where they talked about the general conditions of Bay Ridge and why it was especially vulnerable to pedestrian vehicular accidents. We can investigate that further and really interrogate it. They had a summary of what they did. Basically, they used a scoring system. They sent someone to every intersection, or not every intersection, but they walked the major avenues and stopped at every intersection and rated by about 16 categories, a scale of 0 to 3. And then they added that together and had concerns, what intersections were concerning. They ranked those: highest concern, moderate concern, and concern. And they had, again, conditions. They also listed just a bunch of different things. Some of them were general, like we just think 4th Avenue was bad, was one of them, or, speeding in general. So it changes a lot, but it's not like a specific kind of thing. But they listed out all the stuff they could think about that contributed to pedestrian safety in the neighborhood. And then they set up a bunch of suggestions, including daylighting, and they located things that they wanted the DOT to do. Like they wanted to say, hey, DOT, we don't know what, but do something in front of every school. And then they had a spreadsheet of all of that data. And this is what they looked at. School location: is there a school near this intersection? Is there a park or a playground? Is there a subway entrance? Bus stops. Not sure why multiple bus stops, but multiple bus stops. High traffic car location, high rate of double parking, T intersection, I forget. Oh, then it was misaligned street, that is covered on my view. Long stretch of roadway, obstacles that narrow the sidewalk like trees or street furniture. No sidewalk ramp present. Pedestrians disrupting traffic was observed. Pedestrians disobeying the walk signal observed. Observed vehicles speeding through a yellow light, and low turn visibility for turns on that intersection. And so what's important by this is that they admitted in the committee report that this is not scientific, right? This is a 0 to 3 scale. It's kind of subjective, depends on the time. And also it's a kind of a combination of a lot of different elements. So 25% of that is street design, and 25% though is land use. There's no way we're moving the 77th Street subway stop, right? So 25% of that means that that area is always going to have a rating, so to speak, if we use that rating today. So really, this wasn't a report about what was unsafe. It was about ranking what we should be concerned about. What locations should we look at and be concerned about? And that was given to the DOT. But it also means that we really weren't ranking safety, right? We were ranking our concern. And that was shown in the fact that that committee would add intersections that didn't rank because they all kind of agreed, okay, well, it didn't get in our rankings, but we think this intersection is bad. And I've already done the work. All of that is now available at that link right there, digitized. You can go through that map and see everything that the 2011 committee did by intersection and how they ranked it. Right now, we're seeing that map scaled, those dots scaled to what intersections they were concerned about. So that's also available to the public. You can go through, check those out. You can see Fort Hamilton is kind of thrown in there, Fort Hamilton Parkway, but most of this is in the village section of CB10. And here are some things that we can do to improve. This is just me to start out with. I encourage any committee members to interrupt me and add things when I'm done with this, please. I'm just trying to get the ball rolling. So accuracy, there are mistakes, right? The data is public. Shore Road and 84th Street doesn't exist, but someone ranked the intersection, right? I'm not sure what they observed, but Shore Road and 84th Street. Maybe it was just where the intersection might have been, but there's no crossing there. The street dead ends before it gets to that point. Boundaries, I just showed, that was all in Bay Ridge, but CB10 is Dyker Heights as well. Something too often forgotten. And that was ostensibly because the DOT was supposed to go through and do their own impact study. Never happened, right? Also, blame. Some of the categories, like one of the comments was students disregard traffic, but that doesn't really help with actionability, right? Like what does that mean, students are disregarding traffic? Does that mean students are just going to always do that? Kinda. So we have to think about how we phrase these categories. Is it about intervals on crossings outside of schools? Do they need to be lengthened? Or there aren't enough crosswalks for those students? Do they need to be widened? Let's think about how we can make stuff actionable. Subjectivity as well. 65th and 7th Avenue, even basically one person was assigned 7th Avenue North, one person 7th Avenue South, but they both hit the 65th Street intersection. One person marked it as a 1, another an 8. One person noticed that the streets were misaligned, one person did not. So we're going to have to figure out how we can check our data, make sure that we eliminate that kind of thing, and we account for subjectivity. Maybe hit intersections multiple times, average things together. We can do some data analysis to make that work. And then research, most support only one source, the DOT itself. There's a lot of information we can get now from multiple different agencies. We can go, out of the country. We can get whatever reports really are actionable and look like they will work for our neighborhood, because we are not the DOT. We don't need to just use their findings. And then finally, weighting. We can try to get data that helps us clean this data up and make it useful for other agencies and be something that is a resource for people to use in the future. So with that, I have a couple of metrics. Are there any questions? Does anyone have anything they want to add to that? Feel free to jump in. All right, we'll keep on. Stephanie, please, thank you.
I do have a question.
I am in the middle of it.
Why only and why are we not doing NYPD?
We can absolutely.
I'm just going to suggest that because 19% maybe in 2011 of driver behavior, maybe that's what it was then. But to me now, there are physical infrastructure issues, but it also seems like 60 to 70% might be driver behavior of the big issues that we have. The drag racing seems to be worse. Everybody's running red lights across the country, that kind of thing. So I'll just throw that out there.
Do we want a second to add to the agencies that we send this report to the NYPD?
Yeah.
Yes.
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 I see.
And just jump in. I can't see hands very easily, but.
Barbara, did you have a question? Oh.
No, I agree that we should send the report to agencies other than,
DOT.
DOT, Department of Traffic.
I'd say it's probably a bigger discussion, right?
Yeah.
But there's the MTA.
It's just who we're going to send what's on the floor is really just who we're forwarding this to officially, right? Doesn't mean we're including in the report, but access.
Well, I have a feeling that the report will be. Am I talking over somebody? I don't mean to.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I have a feeling that the report should be shared with our elected officials. I really think part of the reason why we have been ineffective with changing things is because we haven't gotten a lot of community mobilization around this issue. And I think that that's going to be key to any changes that get made. I mean, a report is not going to do very much if there isn't a lot of public outcry.
All right. Dina?
I'm just wondering what the purpose of sharing it with the NYPD would be. I'm not necessarily opposed to it. I definitely think sharing it with representatives would probably be more useful, and they can reach out to NYPD and tell them what to do. It's just, they just don't have the best track record in terms of like enforcement or even following the laws themselves. A lot of the time they are the problem on the road. So just sending them a report, showing them what they already know or should know is kind of just redundant, and I don't know if it's particularly useful.
All right, thanks, Dina. Stephanie?
I have a question, but I wanted to respond to a couple of things. One, I think education is important for the community writ large. Two, going back to the NYPD, they're part of the solution. And I think that there's a lot that we don't know. And my question is, what are the data gathering? What is our role? Are we just observing and commenting, or are we seeking to find ways to address these problems with all the agencies? Do we need to speak with the NYPD? Maybe there are issues that we don't understand about what happens. It's not all about engineering, street engineering. It is also about enforcement, but there are many things we don't know. Additionally, what about legislation? Are we going to explore that? Are there particular pieces of legislation that have been introduced that are supposed to regulate, particularly with the overwhelming number of two-wheeled vehicles? And is there legislation that should be introduced? I'm not quite sure what, I know you discussed scope, but I just wanted to be very clear about what it is that we should be doing and what is considered overreach with this particular project. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. And I can answer some of that right now for everyone, which is it's up to us, right? It's a report. What we put in that report is up to us and who we send it to. And we can choose how wide a net we're going to cast, and we're going to get to that as the last part of this agenda today. We're going to figure out a table of contents, and we're going to see what kind of things do we want to include and how much work do we want to do, right? Ruth.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Ruth, can you hear us?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So I just want to know, do we have any information about what other districts have done in regard to this problem? It must be widespread throughout the city, and I was just wondering if they have formed special committees and done anything and maybe succeeded with something.
I don't know, but that's something we can investigate. That could be homework, right? Let's go through and look. Yeah, Barbara.
I know in Windsor Terrace, there was a law that was passed. It's called Sammy's Law, which restricts traffic in school areas to 25 miles an hour. And I believe that's been enacted across the city and perhaps the state. But I know that the parents of the youngster who was killed were very instrumental in starting a very public outcry over what was happening in that neighborhood, where pedestrian safety became as bad there as it is now here.
Oh, and I see Maya also just raised her hand. That might be Maya. Thanks for joining us. You can unmute if you have something.
You're welcome. I didn't want to interrupt, but I'm Maya Yedin. I am Senator Gennardison's Deputy Chief of Staff. I've been with him for 6 years. I have 3 teenagers, all of whom have been raised in Bay Ridge. And yes, Sammy's Law is the law. It was made the law in April. And so we have been huge advocates for pedestrian and all kinds of street safety from day one. And we are here to support this in any way we can and share whatever you need shared along the way. And once the report is done, and if you run into any red tape along the way, please just know that you can reach out to me and I will help you in any way that I can.
Thank you. Danny.
Yeah, I just wanted to give another example of what's been done elsewhere and very nearby, actually. CB7, which covers Sunset Park. Recently, I don't know if they had a special committee like us, but they did very recently submit a proposal to DOT for a redesign of Third Avenue, which in Sunset Park is the portion under the BQE. They're still working with DOT on that, what that actual redesign will look like, but it's a good indication that, when the community board comes together and recommends that the DOT look at an issue, that they actually I won't say they will listen, but they might.
Right. We do technically have something on the floor, which is to expand. I would allow maybe a friendly amendment to this of just every elected official in Bay Ridge, NYPD. We could add to that as we go along. If we find DSNY, has a role to play, we can expand things, right? But we could send this to everyone. There's no, it's a PDF. It's digital. We're not even wasting paper. So. I'm going to call the question. All in favor first? Go ahead and raise your hand. All right. Seeing quite a few. We got everyone in the room here, and everyone opposed. All right. I think we got that. And any recusals? All right, I believe that passes. We're going to expand this out, and we can amend this. We have, again, 5 months to decide who we want to send this to. But I'm going to keep going with I apologize for the lecture. A lot of people in my life said that I should be a professor, but I'm going to indulge for a moment now. Here are some things that I think we should be aware of as we move forward. KSI, we should know what that means, killed or seriously injured. We should know what AADT is, average annual daily traffic. We should know what a point of conflict is, and a crash versus an accident. This is much credit to Jesse, who is a Bay Ridge resident who wrote an entire book on this. So KSI, here's some good and some bad things about it, but KSI really means killed or seriously injured. It's a metric of a crash. What was the result? It's not limited to pedestrians. It's collected just because NYPD and the hospital system both get correlated data of how bad a particular crash is and if someone is hurt. So injuries on that map are orange, deaths in yellow, in red. And this is going back since the 2011 report was first compiled. This is the kind of Vision Zero map, the crash data map. This wasn't available to the 2011 committee, right? They had to kind of do legwork to find where some of those fatalities occurred, and they couldn't find 2 of them. So we now have focuses on serious injuries. It helps us prioritize. It lets us say, hey, these are places that we already know aren't great, and it is correlated data. Some of the problems, though, is that it will overlook minor things. Like you won't see most pedestrian crashes on here that don't result in a hospital, right? It also doesn't really track just places that a pedestrian doesn't want to go, or a place they don't want to cross, because there aren't going to be enough people crossing to get injured, but it doesn't mean that that intersection is safe. So it also is reactionary. Something has to happen before someone notices with this kind of a metric. Someone has to die. And we should be getting ahead of pedestrian safety, not chasing. So but we need to know this metric because it's something we're going to play with in the next couple of months. Same thing with AADT, annual average. You can break this down. That's one of the good things. This is a map that shows every tracking station or survey by the state in Bay Ridge and CB10. These are stations that count how much car traffic goes through some of our roads. Obviously, they're focused. You see a lot focused on the on-ramps and off-ramps, but there are some that are just on the avenues. 6th Avenue counts, 5th Avenue, 86th Street. We can calculate truck traffic. You can break this down by weekends and things like that. This is great because it helps us start to weight some of the data from the KSIs. How busy is that intersection? A busy intersection is just going to have more people that are in conflict zones. I'd love it if we can try to look at what's safe and what's not, even if there aren't that many cars on it. Colonial doesn't really have that much, but is it safe? We can really start to push that together in a very hyper-local way because we have boots on the ground where the DOT doesn't. So some problems with AADT, though. It can focus on density of traffic, not pedestrian density or road design, other things that really affect the safety of an intersection. Also, very sporadic. Some of them are only for specific studies for specific years, and the data is out of date, or they really don't count residential roads. So that's something that we might be able to fill in, right? If we use this metric and we can make our own AADTs, we can actually fill in a lot of this data and make it really useful. And that brings us to points of conflict. This is how you really, traffic engineer would measure an intersection. This is my map of Ovington and 3rd. This took about 20 minutes. You count all of the paths that traffic can take, including turns, and wherever it overlaps with a pedestrian pathway or another car's pathway, you note that's a potential for a collision, right? So you see 12 possible points where a pedestrian could get hit on this, on Ovington and 3rd, but also very helpfully, you can see where those might happen. They're on the northbound side, on the bottom, bottom center, turning towards Shore Road along Ovington. You can see that long arc. That is a fast turn, fastest turn on this intersection. And it really, you can also see the north crosswalk, the dead center, a car obeying traffic laws isn't going into the dead center of that crosswalk, but you might get a fast right turn, maybe, at the very beginning of that intersection. So you can really start pinpointing where dangerous conditions are on crosswalks, and that really helps very specifically pinpoint what solutions might be effective, right? This one is screaming, slow down that left turn north to west, right? And so maybe a pedestrian island or something would slow that in just one. You can pinpoint it, but also overlooks environmental factors. You know, it's really not a terrain map, the way that streets go up and down. Conditions on the sidewalks that might affect whether a wheelchair is taking one route or another, etc., doesn't take into account that. And also, very critically, assumes everyone's following the law, right? You can't account for every possible U-turn. This map would just be pure black, all lines. And then finally, some just general holistic elements of how we approach traffic safety. This is from Jesse Singer's book, but these really follow any kind of a safety implementation that we might want to take. Let's look at, you know, not blaming individuals for crashes. These are systemic problems. Let's look at the things that can cause it and not just think that someone made a bad decision. We can't accept that, right? We can't just accept that bad things are going to happen. We're here to try to solve things. So let's investigate all of it. Let's change that narrative about an accident. Accidents like this, if it has a map like this, it's predictable. It's not accidental. It is not random chance that is causing this map to occur. Let's look at why it is happening and try to dig deeper into the chain of events. We need to prioritize vulnerable road users. So that is children, older adults, people with disabilities that are often the most vulnerable road users. When I was a child, I was scared of buses because they hissed and it hurt my ears. And I would run and kick the buses, which is very dangerous. And my mom had to stop me. But like, I thought that bus needed to be taught a lesson, and kicking its tire was the best way to keep it from hissing at me, the pneumatic hiss. We need to prioritize and understand how these people are using our pathways and roadways and prioritize them over our own convenience. KSIs are nothing to sneeze at. It is more important than convenience. And finally, accountability. Investigate who can change our roadways, investigate that, and advocate for that change. This isn't just a report that goes out into the ether. We can name people and we can ask people to do something. And that's my spiel. I promise that will be very limited on this committee. It's now up to us, right? So are there any comments? We're gonna get it. I won't open the floor to that right now. We're gonna have 5 months to open the floor to that. But if there's any members of the public who are listening in or watching this meeting, we're gonna move into our first agenda item, which is really to come up with a draft of what we want to see. and what kind of things we want to explore. That might be a little boring for anyone joining remotely. So I do want to open it up to them as well, really briefly, if they have anything that they want to tell us before we start. I don't know if we have anyone who is from the public on our session. But also know that if you leave a comment on the YouTube or email us, we will try to respond to stuff.
This is Doris. Before we continue, I have one comment on the 2011 committee. We did have members who had mobility issues, and I really think we need to include those people in our study and maybe get someone to work with us on this, because they have a very different perspective than we do. A much more intense perspective.
That's another thing that your committee had in spades was public members. I want to let everyone know, please, if you have someone who you think should be on this committee and it is not on community board, let me and Josephine know, and we can start the process of getting more people onto this board for that exact reason, Doris. To expand out the kind of people who can help us, who you think maybe has a skill that would be useful to the committee and wants to volunteer their time or has a unique perspective. I might have some people in mind as well, but we can maybe make that the focus of our first working group meeting. We can schedule that after we finish this agenda item. But let's, I don't think we have anyone from the public who has any questions. Please, if you're watching this in the future, comment. I will read it all. But what do we want to see? Floor is open for all of us. This is the old table of contents. We already were starting on expanding enforcement, exploring enforcement, and I think that would, and also exploring what other community boards have done. That's another avenue to add, is an analysis of how effective those have been. Danny, go ahead. And this is open. Everyone can just jump in.
Sure. So I mean, I think first thing, sort of following off of the discussion that we were having before, I think breaking down our suggestions and requests by, responsible agency, or, in some other way like that would be helpful here. The idea of legislation came up. I don't know if we should spend our energy on going exactly that far, but I think that's something we could include in here too. And I just think, sort of for our own purposes, it would be helpful to understand, what exactly can we realistically ask the NYPD to do? What here does need to be a redesign that we need to kick to the DOT? To really just sort of break it out and inform our own thinking. I think that would be helpful. I don't know if we can create an exhaustive list of who we would want to direct this to tonight, but I think dividing it that way is a good start.
All right, maybe we could have like a content section of actionability. That might be good, where there's something that, we have our recommendations, but we can maybe break those recommendations down as actionable things and who is responsible or who we want to see do those things. And it could be agencies, right?
Yeah.
If we say we want roundabouts, I'm going to do a wild one. Who could build roundabouts, right? Who's responsible for that? There's probably legislation involved. There's probably, of course, DOT, Department of Design and Construction, but
there's no legislation involved. You can have as many roundabouts as they'll let you have.
Oh, thank goodness. I for being on this committee is to roundabout every single intersection.
We agree. And I would just say, I think that and I do so much work with DOT. Josephine will tell you I am the thorn in their side. I would say a lot of this will become organically obvious as it goes along and as you identify, or we identify, however much you want me involved, the the locations and the problems and all of those things. I don't think that you should ignore the NYPD, because I'm looking at this list and there's things on here that are straight up enforcement, and no DOT involvement will repair double parking, right? Somebody's got a ticket for that. So I do think that doing as many agencies as possible is good. I think that the legislation aspect, listen, nobody likes to write laws about street safety more than Andrew Gennardis. We are here for it. And so the legislative ideas will come, I think, from the work that is being proposed. And that's it. I'm not going to take any more time.
Yeah, so let's.
I have one more question, Doris, again.
Go ahead, Doris.
Okay, one of the things that has made crashes much more dangerous than it was when we did our survey a long time ago is the size and design, the weight and design of current vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
The design of many SUVs and mini trucks that are everyday usage don't just break your legs, they shatter your chest.
Yeah.
And is there any way of breaking the crash data down? Can we get that information? I mean, there are people who are concerned about it. There are people who have proposed legislation to change the insurance rate for those vehicles.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's something, I don't think we can delve deeply in it, but we should consider it.
That, I mean, yeah, that would be a great way to, like, I've always wondered about that. It could be something maybe when we go out and do counts that we also take into mind, like, general vehicle type. That might be interesting. We can also double check, maybe that's a reason to bring, the 68th precinct in to see if they have that data for crashes. And if they're willing to share that with us in some anonymized way. I don't know what the privacy laws are on that, but if we can get data from them that we can make public or CB10, that's a reason to engage them, right? That they would have data for us. That we ask, maybe that's one of the things that we do is when we ask other, agencies in, we're asking them for data. We're asking them for something, not just letting them tell a narrative from their side, but what do we need from you? Ruth, go ahead.
Yeah, what about all of these electric bikes that don't have any license plates or anything? Probably no insurance, no nothing. I think that's a big problem.
Yeah. And that could be something that we maybe adjust the table of contents. How does anyone else have any thoughts about that? For maybe expanding the types of, because that goes to the cars, SUVs versus this versus that, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is, I mean, just to comment on that, I think that's certainly something to think about. I think on the other hand, I think you always have to keep in mind that while there are cyclists to pedestrian and e-bike to pedestrian serious injuries, they're at a much lower rate than car to pedestrian.
Yeah.
Right. But it does happen, and it's worth considering.
We had that in 2011. I mean,
Correct.
I could tell you we've had two that I know of, very, one death and one very serious injury, with I don't even think it's an e-bike, it's motorized scooter, it's gas powered, which I don't think should be allowed, but I do think there are other places that we can get data. The boards, community districts used to have access to a district resource statement, which included some PD data that I haven't seen in a while, which includes the number of unlicensed motorists, or motorists with suspended license. There could be some more granular data that you could retrieve off of accident reports generally. So that could be even from DOT, I'm not sure, or PD. I know that data goes to the state, so there might be a way to research that as well.
It's sounding like for this table of contents, we're expanding out that addendum that already exists, right? The data part of it is now getting really big. Like, we're gathering data.
Well, so I have a couple of comments.
Yeah.
One is I actually sent you something. I don't know if we can look at it, Josephine. One of my comments has a graphic that goes with it. That it just emailed to you a second ago. Yeah.
We can
Yeah.
stop the share because we've gone through the
But I'll make
presentation.
my other comment first,
Yeah.
if you don't mind. One is I think that something that we could also think about that's worth reviewing are the projects that are either being planned for our district or are already underway. So it's, I think it's hard to get any agency to do something from scratch. I think it's easier to find a project that's already in the works and say, here's where you can make it a little safer for pedestrians. So I would include that, a review of current projects. This is something I'll just throw out there. This is something that I think is a way to think about these problems. This is called a safe systems approach to pedestrian safety.
We'll pull that
If we
up
can
in
share
just a
it.
sec.
It's a lot easier as a graphic, which I did not create.
Sorry,
Yeah.
we'll get that up. Where did it go? Sharing screen. Oh, just escape out of it. It's because I have it full screened. There we go. Put that away.
I can pull this up.
Yeah, so there we go.
So,
There we go.
so this is something that comes up with connected with Vision Zero.
Yeah.
Right. When they start to do Vision Zero programs, this is sort of like a framework that's been proposed for thinking about pedestrian safety and traffic safety. And I can kind of walk you through it. I think it's really helpful, right? So it's a little bit like Maslow's hierarchy of needs for any like nursing students out there. In that the things at the bottom lead to the biggest impact, right? So if you could change levels of poverty, right? If you could change the number of people driving versus using mass transportation, you'd have a huge impact on population health, right? The problem is that the things at the bottom are very hard to do and very slow, right? And so as you move up the pyramid, things become easier to do, like increased enforcement, writing more tickets, for example, right? But will ultimately have a less of an impact, right? And so you kind of have to like weigh any interventions that you're thinking about doing, right? Doing public education is pretty easy, right? To educate drivers and pedestrians, but it has a limited impact because you're depending on individuals to like internalize that education and change their behavior. The other thing that's kind of sort of been added to it, so the original pyramid is the one in the middle. Stuff that's kind of been added to it is enforcement, right? And so what they're talking about is the difference between active and passive enforcement on the right side of the screen. Active enforcement being police officers writing tickets, passive enforcement being like speed cameras, right? And latent safety measures, and how those can ultimately have kind of a bigger effect than the individual officer writing tickets. So anyway, I don't want to go on and on, but I think this is an interesting way to think about it. Safe systems approach.
Danny, you have your hand up?
Sure. I think Dino had his up before me, though, if he wants to go first.
Dino, please.
Well, I think it was about the e-bikes. I just wanted us to be careful when we talk about e-bikes. There's different classifications with different speeds, different features on the bike that isn't just visible by the type of bike. Like you could have a fat tire e-bike that is like a class 2 that only goes up to 20 miles an hour and doesn't have like a throttle. And then one that looks like a road bike that's like a class 3 that goes 28 and has a throttle. So like it's not easy to distinguish between these, and just lumping them all together as one is also not fair. Yeah, so I just wanted to point that out.
And then Danny, go ahead.
Yeah, so what I was going to say, to sort of bring it back to the structure of the report, is very similar to the hierarchy of needs that we were just looking at. I think it would be helpful. I'm not sure exactly where it would go. My inclination is sort of after we identify the problems, sort of like a principles list, right? Like a list of, when we're making these recommendations, what our assumptions are. For example, on, talking about e-bikes. An assumption that I think would be reasonable is that, providing additional or new areas for bikes, including e-bikes, to have, for their own, like bike lanes, protected bike lanes, something like that. That would be a starting point to make sure that they have somewhere to go rather than the sidewalk or rather than, into the street where there are cars that could get into an accident with them as well. And that way, there will still be violators, I'm sure. And then that's where enforcement sort of comes into supplement. So I think it's sort of very similar to the pyramid we were just looking at, of this is what our preferred approach would be when we see a problem. Um, Something like that. I don't know exactly what it would look like, but just sort of agreed upon principles for our recommendations, I think would be helpful too.
I don't know also where this would go, and echoing what Danny said, I thought that was helpful. The MTA running sufficient service, I think that's a big part of this. People are driving because they can't take a bus that is supposed to arrive on time. I know I go back with Maya on this sometimes about buses that don't show, but then you get in an Uber and the Uber is driving very fast. And then that would be another portion is Uber and TLC. How do we, is that an issue here? Is that separate? I don't know, but I think that might be something to consider. An issue of recidivist extreme speeding drivers, people who are driving 80 miles an hour in school zones, not just the people who are racking up the automated enforcement. What does it take to get those drivers off the road? I feel like probably in Bay Ridge, like 5%, of the drivers who are speeding, there's 5% that are just so egregious that you can't even phone in their license plate number to say this person is going to hit somebody. And because they're going so fast, you can't see it. And that seems to be a component. I don't think that it has to be enforcement all the time, but I think that there should be some ability to get these. So is that something that we can investigate? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then the final thing, I'm sorry, and then I'm done, is school zones. Kids are not walking to school. They used to walk to school. They don't walk to school anymore. And part of the reason they don't walk to school is because not enough of them are walking to school. So their parents are afraid to let the kid walk to school by themselves. Should we consider the possibility of specific walk to school zones that are safe during?
He said that earlier.
Oh, you said it earlier.
No,
No.
the meeting
Before the
started.
meeting started, I was like, I don't want to interrupt the
about that,
meeting
yeah.
with this idea, but like, no, that's great.
Can we have, everybody's going to PS 102. It's a specific safe walk to school zone on Bay Ridge Parkway. Everybody can walk together. That there will be even parent volunteers, whatever. The community endorses this. We endorse children being able to have some freedom in the neighborhood because I know as a parent that I've lived across from parks, literally across the street from the park, but you have to walk your child across that street to get them to the park. That's ridiculous. It's not fair to kids. And I think that maybe one of our principles should be that you should be able to have some kind of freedom in the neighborhood at a younger age because it's contributing to problems to have them inside on iPads all the time. My rant is over. Thank you for listening.
No.
I actually just want to second exactly what you're saying, that I would put a lot of weight on the vulnerability of the people in whatever area we're looking at, right? To me, my gut says that we should, if we're looking for intersections and areas to prioritize, we should be making that list largely on who is there, right? Children and the elderly are at a much higher risk than adults are. So I agree completely with you. That should be a guiding principle for how we put this thing together. Yeah.
Do we have any other hands raised? Anyone, feel free to unmute, break in. This is a working group discussion. We're working. But yeah, go ahead. Nope, it's gone. What's it's sounding like to me is like we have some really broad stuff. And like, I love that hierarchy of needs. That might be like the meat of the report, right? We have varying degrees of recommendations. We've categorized them so we know what's like big and hard and small and easy. We acknowledge that fact right off the bat. We aren't saying that all of these are equal in terms of their impact, but all of them we have ideas for all of them. A school safety corridor could be one on that second level of like street design. And we could say, this is a proposal. It has a legislative probably reason for occurring. It has a DOT impact. It has a Department of Education. There's Safe Streets Initiative. They would need to be reached out to, but we could identify that and say, these are the people responsible. And this is how, and they need to get together if we want this to be a thing, and we could propose how it should be done, and how we want it to be done. We could map it. Oh, go ahead. Oh, Barbara, you're muted.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are.
Could that be expanded to include a pedestrian corridor? Where pedestrians really had more agency than cars?
Yeah.
On one particular route?
It already sounds like we're spinning out into sub-working groups, right? Where like, this is something that anyone who's interested, I think we should get together and write out that kind of a proposal. And we could have data collection as one side of this committee that provides to the other working groups for the data that they need to make their recommendations, but we could be making these larger recommendations in addition to just getting a spreadsheet together.
Yeah, I think that maybe one of our initial steps would be to update. So in the 2011 report, they had some survey criteria, right? So they had all these things that they were looking at when they looked at any given intersection, right? And I think our first order of business is to make sure we're happy with that, right? Because it sounds like we're all talking about some things that weren't being considered at that time, that we want to consider as we're gathering data. I would start there. That's kind of what I think.
I think that's our first working group meeting. Our closed, we're going to just debate for some time about each individual criteria, what needs to be added, what's improperly weighted, that kind of thing, and update that.
Yeah, and I think what you want is, I think eventually we're all going to sort of like deploy, and each of us will be seeing multiple intersections in multiple areas. And I think it's important that we have what they sometimes call like inter-rater reliability, right? So that like when Dan, you go out and look at something and I go out and look at something, we're looking at using the same criteria.
That goes to Dino's thing of like, you can't easily identify like an e-bike by its type. Like, exactly. But that old report, like what's the difference between a 1 on the like a safe ADA ramp being bad and a 3? Like, I don't know. And also I don't know who reported each one of those. So I can't like say like, oh, this one, like reviewer A usually reviewed this low or reviewed this high, and you can't correct for that.
One more comment. I feel like I'm taking over. Sorry.
I will tell you, one of the person who did most of the work on ADA ramps was a wheelchair user.
There we go.
Yeah.
It was a person with personal and experience.
I will say that my mom, who is a wheelchair user, has volunteered me her giving a rating on every bump she hits. But yeah.
I think also we were talking about how things have changed. When I walk on Narrows Avenue or Ridge Boulevard or some of the big thoroughfares, and we have several of them, it doesn't seem like traffic patterns are necessarily orchestrated by anything other than a four-way stop sign. And since people don't always follow stop signs, I find they're pretty ineffectual on those big drag streets where cars pick up speed and there are no lights, for 15 blocks.
Yeah. I mean, that's a person will speed when they don't think that there's someone else there. It doesn't matter what like signs are there. If you don't expect a person to be in the road, you're going to go fast. It's just kind of human nature on that. Dino, please.
This is something that I noticed in the 2011 report. They identified basically every major corridor in the district as an area that has speeding as a problem, a major problem. Nothing really has been done about it. I know on Marine, which the entirety of Marine was listed as a problem area, they didn't even put speed bumps until Anne Marie Weisner was killed in 2023. I think it was 2023. There's no daylighting. There's no traffic calming measures. There's no lights, speed signs or speed signal, whatever. Sorry, stop signs. people run them all the time, like on 97th and Shore. If you go there at night, people don't stop. I try crossing the street, I'm like waiting, and people don't even stop for this. So you need to have like, I think enforcement can be part of this solution, but I think ultimately it's building infrastructure that prevents this type of behavior from being so prevalent and easy to do.
Yes.
And that's part of that hierarchy,
Yeah,
right?
I just want to say there were a number of intersections that were daylighted. There were lots of LPIs that were instituted following the report. As far as the daylighting spots, they're great when they're adhered to. The biggest problem we have is we have many, many daylighting spots that are just not adhered to. And you know, you need that enforcement, or you need, you know, there are places in the district where we've added the big stones. We've asked DOT to put them in because you just have cars parking in those areas that shouldn't be. So that's something else that maybe we can take a look at. But there were many studies that came as a result of the last report. You know, some intersections didn't meet the national standards for a traffic light, you know. You know, I bring up Jane Marie Kapitanakis, the school where she's the principal. You know, there was lots of times where this, you know, parents organized and asked for traffic lights. It just didn't meet the warrants. You know, DOT came back 1, 2, 3, 4 times, and that street was redesigned. You know, there and there are still safety concerns, right? So, you know, it's not going to be a fix it, but certainly raising, you know, whether it becomes the top 10 intersections like was done last time, or 15 or 5 or whatever it is, I do think that sometimes taking a fresh look.
I just want to jump in real fast. It is New York State law that every single intersection needs to be daylit, including in New York City. New York City has opted to not follow that law. There is a push within, I don't know, certain, I don't know if Andrew Gennardes is part of this push, but they are trying to do that to get every single intersection daylit, but it is part of New York State law.
Yeah, but I think the city passed a law that says there's a certain amount each year that are going to be done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And
so
like,
that law was passed, that law was
as
changed.
far as Vision Zero, like Hoboken achieved it a few years ago, right? Like, and they did it. One of the big things they did was they daylit every intersection, and they achieved Vision Zero. Most, not entirely on that. There's a lot that we could read. That could be a area of research where maybe we add a like table of content element of like, here are literally some things that have already been done that can be done here. And that'll probably just be part of that hierarchy of needs of our recommendations, interventions, maybe we could call them, the interventions we think need to be made. And that's separate from the data, which we can make more public and more neutral that anyone can use, but this is what we built off of that data. So there's a data section, there's a recommendation section. And the other thing that I'm hearing is also a narrative, right? Because a lot of times we're talking about the way it used to be and the way it is now. And Josephine's talking about the stuff that we did do, the recommendations we asked for. And that's never part of the record, right? Like, where is the map or the data of every time? Like, yeah, there's 311 data, but where's the map of all the things that CB10 ever requested going back 30 years for street safety and what happened? And what's all of the DOT's projects that they brought to us over the past 20 years and what happened to them? And were they successful in other neighborhoods? And if so, what was the result there? And why didn't it happen here? And did our traffic numbers stay the same and someone else go down? Why didn't that not happen? So
I think that's a very important consideration.
Yeah, because that explains also our duty to the public of why is this happening?
Yeah, I was just going to build on that a little bit. I'm a believer that there's a way to make a report like this compelling is to not lose sight of the like qualitative element, right? So what we've been talking about is quantitative data, right? Statistics and accident rates and so forth. But it's important to talk to people and include that sort of thing in the report as well, right? Like, how do people feel in the area that they are? How do they feel about like this street or this school? I think, you know, I think that's not only makes the report more compelling, but it adds like a dimension to it that you lose when you just focus on the numbers, right?
Yeah.
So
maybe that's table of contents, introduction to Danny's point, like, you know, here are assumptions that are made that don't have data backing it because these are just assumptions, but we're going to work with that. then a narrative, then recommendations, and then raw data, which is very similar to the 2011 report, but a little bit more focused. Anyone, please jump in. I saw some hands go up. Denny, please.
Yeah, I think two things. I think one, I really like the idea of, sort of qualitative section. I wonder as well, um, although I don't know if this is possible given the timeline, if we can do some sort of survey, like a actual opinion survey. I hope and I think, what we're doing here will be pretty broad in scope, and I think um, an important next step here is going to actually be sure that we're getting buy-in from the community. And part of that, I think, is going to be making sure that we and as much of the community as possible agree on what the problems are we're actually trying to solve. So we've talked a lot about, children, the safety of children, of people with disabilities, of, older people. I think, understanding how people view safety in their own community is a really important part of this too. I have no idea how we're going to do that, particularly in 5 months, but it's just a thought. And then this has come up a couple of times too. Is I think it's helpful to sort of understand, what requests or asks that we would have do have some sort of, legal impossibility or limitation on them, talking about placing streetlights or something. Or that, the city just isn't able to daylight intersections at the rate that we would like. I think that is also helpful to sort of tie to the enforcement angle, because there we can identify specific asks for the precinct, right? Of, we would like to do this, we can't, or it can't be done, so we need you here. Because I think, in terms of making sure that this is effective, if we were to just, sort of send NYPD a list of, do better here, do better on this issue, it's kind of just going to go into the pile. But if we say, this intersection is somewhere where you need to station somebody at these hours, um, then it becomes something where they probably won't do everything we ask for, but we at least have, we're giving them a guide for how they can allocate their own resources in the most effective way.
Yeah, I think that they do that now. When you go to some of the meetings, they speak about anyway how they target, not target, but they analyze data and they put resources in certain locations based on crash data. So it might be interesting to have them at a meeting and really understand what it is that they're already doing.
Yeah,
to follow the data.
along with that accountability aspect of like, when it's a broad ask, you can't really make that accountable. Like, how do you define that? What is it? Just the number of tickets written? Like, but when
Maybe
it's
with an
specific,
education, they've gone out and done education at certain high crash locations, pedestrian.
There was an open data metric for like education projects the DOT did that was fun on open data, where the metric that's listed is how many flyers were handed out for that education session. But like, again, this is all these things are kind of feeding into each other, right? Go ahead, Barbara. You have your hand raised? You're muted.
Unmuted, hand down. Okay. Another thing that's always kind of perplexed me is, what does it take to get DOT to act? Because in my experience living in Windsor Terrace, we advocated for years and years and years and years to turn my daughter's street, which is Sealy Street, into a one-way street instead of a two-way street, and to get traffic lights so that pedestrians could cross Prospect Park Southwest, particularly during rush hour. Because oftentimes the streets would just be blocked, you couldn't cross because the traffic would be stopped and be stopped blocking the streets. And nothing that we did or said seemed to make any difference in terms of, we would get the same response year after year. We've done our analysis, it's not necessary. Well, what makes it necessary? What is your criteria for what is, for what makes it necessary?
I agree. And the other part, I was doing a lot of research before this committee started. There is a maybe 500,000 plus entry database of every analysis the DOT was prompted to do by someone like you. And here's what the report's ID is, here's where the intersection is, going back to 1995. And it is a very obtuse database with very bad information. It is very hard to process. I would have to go line by line to make a map of it for CB10, because it's not by region, it's just borough and intersection. So you gotta know what intersections you're looking for, but there might be a way of parsing that data. Or we could say, hey, one of our recommendations to the DOT is, why don't you make that available? Why don't you digitize those reports? Why don't you let it be obvious to people what the result of their requests are and what the results were and why they were rejected or not? Because, you know what they are most of the time, but CB10 has our own data on that, right? So maybe making some of that much more publicly accessible is something we can do. Something where if we're going to start assigning, who's responsible for street safety, it's also us. We've had a role in this for the past 30 years plus, right? Going back as far as since we've been around. So we can analyze what our role has been and what our recommendations have been as part of our narrative section, including the other agencies.
So Dan, I think we should talk, I just want to mention too that Rose from Transportation Alternatives did put some
Q&A?
responses in the
Thank you,
Q&A.
Rose, for attending.
So she just said, going back to the issue raised by Doris, the disproportionate impact of vehicles on crashes, road safety is something that TA is focused on. So the research folks can give a breakdown for us. And it shouldn't be so difficult since all crash reports include the make and model, vehicles getting back to the passenger vehicle. So thank you, Rose, for that. And then Dan, I think maybe we should talk about, give the hours to talk about.
We are going to, I would like to schedule a working group meeting to focus on getting the categories right for what we want to do for generating that data, because that is something that's going to be time intensive. And we're going to need to get that ready quick if we're then going to use some of that to develop recommendations. So I was hoping we could do a Zoom only closed meeting. We will have it recorded if anyone requests it, but no public session. We're just gonna chat and be a lot more informal. I was hoping to do that within 2 weeks. I could send out, is everyone okay with me sending out an availability thing to their email? And we can get availability, because I don't want to leave anyone out and I don't want to work it out. It would take us an hour to work out our availability. Right? So I will send out a form to everyone. Please look for that. Anything else?
Do you mind?
Yeah.
I think that sounds great. I completely agree that that's the priority, what you're talking about there. I was going to throw out maybe 2 other homework assignments / working groups that I think would be helpful at this stage. One is, I think it'd be helpful to have some people look at background, right? What's the legal environment? What are the relevant agencies? Maybe what are some other things that are being done in other cities, that sort of thing, right? Background information. And then the other piece of it was qualitative, right? What's our approach going to be to gathering, comments and things from the community, right? And getting that kind of personal narrative.
Yeah.
What's our approach going to be?
As Danny said, that would take time. And if we want to do that, we need to start now. We need to have that form ready, and we need to start distributing in order to get that data back and act on it. Right? So first working group is going to be categories. It's going to be what are we doing for our actual like distribution for getting community feedback? Is this a digital only thing? Is this handing out something? Making sure we capture the right road users as well, like commuters who might not be in Bay Ridge. How do you get them who are on the roads like 86th Street? How do you ensure that we're getting people with disabilities? Young kids, are they filling out a form online? But again, that's going to be our next working group. I will send out that form. We're going to start working. We're going to get a really big report done. Anything else that we need to cover? The next public session, I'll also send out a list. I was hoping we can do that. Maybe we'll schedule that during the working group where we think about maybe for public sessions, it's about things that the public really should be looking at and need to know. Maybe it's when we invite agencies in, right? So maybe at the next committee working group, we also say, what's the first agency we want to pull in? And who do we want to talk to? Does that sound good for anyone? Any discussion, ideas, change things around? Tell me I'm crazy.
That's a given.
Yeah, my wife says the same.
I do think it's important to set, a realistic table of contents and guideline for the time period. And it doesn't mean that it ends in June, like the conversation continues, but I think a lot of great ideas came out, and thank you, Dan.
Thank you everyone for contributing. This is going to be a great report. I can't wait to see it in a couple of months.